Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
I'm Albert Hand. I'm a retired lawyer. I've lived here. My wife and I moved here from New York area about 22 years ago. Today is Thursday, April 10th. It is 10:30 a.m. This is panel number 18121, titled AI Boyfriends and Girlfriends, Love and Connection in the Age of AI. Before we get started, the University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impact. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. One other thing I'd like to mention is that we want to be sure you get a chance, you in the audience, to ask questions. The format that we use for questions after years and years of back and forth and experimentation is note cards. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and one of our producers will give you a pencil, pen, and a note card, and you write your question and it'll come up to me. That's the opening statement. This, by the way, how many of you are here because you don't know what AI is, and how many of you are here because you do know and you're interested in what is going to go on here? Raise your hands. Who knows what AI is? Okay, because we sort of had a bet that most of the people wouldn't know what AI is, and they would be here to learn. So we'll see. I'm going to introduce the panelists. We have four excellent panelists. There's Nicole Ellison, who's right there. She's a professor at the University of Michigan. Her research includes social and interpersonal aspects of online technologies and computer-mediated communication. To my left is Wakanyi Hoffman. She is we were talking beforehand, she's a scholar on Ubuntu philosophy, and I was wondering what Ubuntu philosophy has to do with AI, and we had a very interesting conversation, about 5 or 10 minutes. She says that Ubuntu philosophy or way of life is an African-derived approach that prioritizes community rather than individuality. It's everything that Descartes isn't, and it will tie into AI. Laura Marciano, she's at the Lee Kum-Shong Center for Health and Happiness at Harvard. Her work explores the impact of smartphone and social media use on teen well-being. And over on my left is Tashiro. He's an author, psychologist, and relationship expert. Has been an award-winning professor at University of Maryland and UC, University of Colorado. He lives in New York City. We also were talking beforehand about what was going on here, and he raised that there's some sexual context to this that I will be interested in him following through on or enlightening us about. The next thing we'll do is I will ask each of our distinguished panelists to give an opening remark of 3 to 4 minutes in length, and we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll take it from there. Who wants to go first?
I think we.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for being here, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah? Okay. Better? Yeah? Okay. So before I start my remarks, we thought it would be useful just to do an overview of what AI companions are so that we're all starting with some common ground. So AI companions are essentially digital personas. You've probably interacted with chatbots in various kind of maybe business settings. So think of an AI companion as your own personalized chatbot. That can take on the role of a friend or therapist or, I guess as Ty alluded to, a romantic partner. Like many forms of AI, these AI companions are trained on human data using large language models. So essentially what they're doing is they are looking at vast stores of interactions between humans and then finding patterns and using those to respond to humans in a way that can feel very, very intimate and personal and human. They are, so some important affordances or characteristics of AI companions. One is that you can personalize them. So in the same way that you can create a prompt for an AI situation that will allow the AI to kind of have some understanding of what kind of tone or context is surrounding the particular situation. You can give your AI companion a characteristics, a name, a visual component. They have memory, so across instances of interactions, they will remember. Not always perfectly, but they can remember kind of past interactions about you or about personality characteristics that you've given them. And then also importantly, they are ubiquitously available. So they are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This chatbot, unlike one's friends, for instance, are available to give you kind of immediate responses. The first generation were really more kind of text-based, and now with kind of the increase in video and visual technologies, these now are, you can have audio conversations, you can have video conversations. My sense is that most of the interactions are still text-based. So that's what, this is also a large and growing area. It's a little tricky to get good stats, but a couple of ones I'll just kind of throw out there is that Replica is one of the most popular ones with, 3 years ago, 10 million users. One report that I found estimated that the user base for the top 6 AI companions now is about 52 million. And we would expect to see that growing. So it is a fairly established set of technologies. That said, the technologies are still evolving, as are the social practices. Okay, so for my own take on it, I am my training is communication. I study communication and technology, how people use technologies to maintain and initiate relationships. And I would say that having studied many technologies as they are first introduced, as well as the kind of history of communication technology, I suspect that one theme that we will see on the panel and out in the audience is kind of fear, anxiety, skepticism. And I would really encourage us to try to put that to the side for a moment. I do believe that there are things that we should be paying attention to. For instance, data privacy issues. What are who are the companies that are producing these technologies, and what are their motivations? But I think I would encourage us not to kind of have the knee-jerk reaction of this is pretending to be a human, it's not a human, it's scary and bad. Any technology, when it's first introduced, is subject to dystopian and utopian kind of hopes and visions, and those are often rooted in contemporary anxieties, right, that we then are kind of mapping onto the future. So, for instance, with the telephone, I think nowadays we would think of the telephone as fairly commonplace and not particularly scary, but when it was first introduced, there were fears that people would lose the ability to, interact face to face, or there was a marketing campaign that had to convince immigrants that the telephone spoke their language, because that was a concern they'd had with other technologies. I think I will leave it there, although I will share one last quote, and this is from Sherry Turkle from 2007, so almost 20 years ago now, and she was studying robots at the time, and her quote from one of her participants was, "Show me a person looking for a robot to do something, and I'll show you someone who's looking for a person and can't find one." So maybe we need to think about, yes, it's not a human, but maybe there are times when a human's not available. Maybe there are instances where I would like to get feedback on something in a kind of judgment-free situation. Maybe I don't want to disclose something to my, people in my offline networks. Maybe I want to kind of practice communication skills, right? I can think of many, many instances where AI companions could be useful, and we haven't even really touched around on loneliness and the loneliness epidemic, which is another potential way that these technologies might be used. Thank you.
You guys have worked, excuse me, have worked out the order. I don't know what it is. Are you next?
I can go next.
Yeah, okay, good.
Thank you. And thank you, Nicole, for this amazing introduction. So since we now have a little bit more of background about AI agents, what I can add from my perspective is the role of perception when a relationship with an AI agent is formed. So my background is in psychology and neuroscience, and I will always remember the first lesson of the professor that I had in Italy on neuroscience, and she told us that our reality is a byproduct of our perception. So this is my reality, okay, and it's really like the byproduct of what I perceive today, but also of my history and my feelings. And this is real, and even a thought and a feeling, even if I'm just thinking about that, is real to me. So whatever is happening with AI agents, the feelings that people relate to that, they are real, because that's our reality, right? And this is also why, if we think about in another topic like athletes, when athletes need to imagine, what they will do during their training, I don't know, playing basketball, we have seen in science that just imaging, playing basketball can have a positive effect on the final performance. So even just imaging to have a relationship and that intimacy is there, and feeling that, it's real. It's something real for our brain. It's our perception. So I think this is extremely important to take in mind, as well as the role of loneliness that you tackle. So also loneliness is subjective. There is a huge difference between being lonely and being isolated. I can be lonely even if I'm around a lot of people, because loneliness is different from isolation. Isolation is an objective status. You are just isolated from other people. You can be like in the forest, for example, or go hiking here. But loneliness is related to a gap between the actual relationship, my actual relationships, and my desired relationship or level of intimacy that I would like to have. So if this gap is like large, so then there is also where the need of these AI agents can, it's a space for these agents to like an opportunity to feel that need for us, right? And loneliness is very important from different perspectives. So if we think about the loneliness epidemic, loneliness is a risk factor for all-cause mortality, and the effects of loneliness as a risk factor for our health is larger than smoking 15 cigarettes per day, than drinking 6 alcoholic drinks per day, than physical inactivity, than air pollution. So loneliness is extremely important for our health. So I think just from my perspective and what I'm come from my research, considering, the perception, the feeling is real, and the loneliness component is very important when we start this conversation.
Okay.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
get a little bit closer.
Get closer. Okay. Thank you, Laura. Ashley, you took a few of my words, and I'm very grateful to hear that. And I was going to say loneliness. I think of it as loneliness and being alone. So there's a huge difference there. And I think you kind of elaborated on that. Being alone is isolated, and being lonely is something, there's a gap between you and others socially, a social gap. So my name is Wakanyi, and I work at Utrecht University. I'm with the Inclusive AI Lab there. And what I'm looking at is the ethics of being human. And I look at this from the concept of the Ubuntu philosophy that Albert talked about. Ubuntu is this philosophy originally from Africa, but it really what it means is being human. The word itself means being human. So when we look at that from that perspective, what does it mean to be human? I am reminded of that philosophy, and that's what I bring into my research. And I look at that. I look at the ethics of being human from an Ubuntu philosophy and how that ethical framework can inform designers when they are designing AI tools or innovating with AI technology across the continent. Because you really have to take into consideration what it means from an African perspective to be a person as opposed to Descartes saying, I think, therefore I am. From an Ubuntu perspective and all across Africa, it's I am because of who we all are. So the emphasis is more on the community. It's a pluralistic approach to being human, that your humanity is tied to others, and therefore your own well-being is also tied to others. Therefore, socializing with others obviously amplifies your own well-being, and that you can't be alone and be well. So that's kind of the idea behind Ubuntu. And this is not to negate the thinking or avoid the cognitive thinking that Descartes was obviously talking about, but it's that is included. So the Ubuntu philosophy puts more emphasis on the being human. What does it mean to be human? It's more than just your cognitive ability to think about things. So from that perspective, what I'm looking at here and why I think I'm on this panel. They didn't tell us why they chose us to be on this panel, but I can think of this as an inquiry. As a question that I'm sitting with is, can AI boyfriends and girlfriends, because that's what we're talking about, can they contribute towards that collective, that pluralistic being human flourishing? And I was part of a human flourishing program at an institute in Germany. So I spent a lot of time, a whole year, in fact, sitting every day talking about what it means to be human beyond the material. What does it mean to be human on the inside? So, for example, how do these AI chatbots or companions impact our individual relationships? Because it's an individual choice. I can choose to have that companion for any number of reasons, whether it's to solve loneliness or, if you've moved into a new country or a new city, that could be very helpful, right? Being able to understand how to be a person in that particular context. But it also has an impact on the relationships that you have, the human relationships you have with others. So, for example, I'm thinking and I think Ty might talk about it a little bit, because now we're at the point where these AI companions could become partners, romantic partners that you could even marry. That's the experiment's already there. So imagine, I imagine one of my friends getting married to an AI partner. That's great for them, right? They've made that decision, and I respect that, whatever choice you make. But I still have a relationship with my friend. Therefore, by extension, I have a relationship with their partner. So that has an impact on me. So from an Ubuntu perspective, I think of that collective flourishing. Is my flourishing enhanced or not? Or what choice do I have? And what kind of conversation do I need to have with myself in order to see that as part of the collective flourishing? And I think that's what I'm bringing to this conversation. Thanks.
So if you ask couples, let's maybe do two things. What do you want from a boyfriend, girlfriend? And what can research tell us also about what happens when that's not going well? You're not getting what you want. So if you ask couples, what's your number one, what are the problems in your relationship? Study after study, the number one thing that comes out is we have trouble communicating. Okay, we have trouble communicating, which is actually a really broad term when you take a step back from it. My old advisor used to like to say, the problem is not communication, the problem is that people don't like what they hear, which I thought was a really wise point. But what's the nature of that communication problem? A lot of times when you drill deeper into it, what they'll say is, my partner doesn't hear me. In other words, my partner doesn't have empathy, doesn't have a holistic understanding of my situation, and also is not making the effort. And I'm sure you know couples like this, right? That can go on for years, for decades, where someone's trying to get a point across to the other person, and it is just bouncing off their hard head. And sometimes you can even witness them trying to communicate this thing, and it's just not sinking in for the other person. We find this extraordinarily distressing as humans, because it tells us at a core we're not accepted, right? And that creates all kinds of anxiety. What does it take then to feel like someone else understands you or gets you? That they're taking in the things that you're saying, and that those things are important to them just as they are to you. Well, one of the encouraging things is it doesn't take that much. So in the 1970s, psychologists had this point of crisis where they realized in this big meta-analysis that psychotherapy was pretty ineffective. Like, it wasn't much better than a control group, okay? So people were spending years in psychoanalysis, and they would have been just as well off sitting at home, right, and doing their own devices. Now, one of the things that came out of that crisis was he said, well, why is the, psychoanalysis, for example, not outperforming the control group? And the encouraging finding was that the control group is really, really good. Okay, so a lot of times the control group in these studies is what we would call active listening skills. You tell me something, I say it sounds like you're really worried about that. It's kind of the stereotypical therapist thing. I might say, how do you feel about that? Super stereotypical therapist thing. So what you're saying is, and I just repeat back what you told me. I'm sure you've all had some kind of training in this at some point. Those are the control groups. And so if you had 8 weeks of someone just engaging in active listening with you, it felt amazing. That someone was totally tuned into what you were saying. And it made you feel like they were invested in you. And because you had that investment and that trust, now you were able to take a look at things in yourself that were too hard to do alone, which is actually kind of a pretty cool finding, right? So as bad as some training programs can be, every training program will teach therapists how to do active listening skills. And that will be actually really helpful. What these programs do, partly at the core, is they are amazing at active listening. And it also tells us how bad the average human is, right, at listening or trying to empathize with what's going on. So one of the reasons why I think, probably, people find these interactions with AI companions so gratifying is it just simply listens. And then it says, hey, it sounds like you're feeling this. What I hear you saying is that this is what's happening. And then it'll ask you like a simple question. So how is that for you? When was the last time someone asked you that question? So tell me more about that, right? So they can be really powerful in the spirit of being open-minded. They could be really powerful agents for good if they do provide that solid base then for you to explore other things. But one of the other things I think that we'll talk about today is maybe they could not be so good for other things sometimes. So I'm excited to hear what folks have to say.
Okay, a question I have is, do any of you have anything to follow up with what anyone else has said? Do you have any questions about what Ty said or anything to add?
I would like to add something to what Ty just said, because it's related, as you have said, to feeling this sense of investment and trust and feeling seen, right? And when I was saying why loneliness is a risk factor for health, why, on the opposite, social support can improve health. So we know from studies, also from other disciplines, that there is a connection between feeling lonely and cortisol levels in our body. So basically, feeling lonely and not supported raises our stress levels, and that is the risk factor for a lot of mental and physical illnesses. So why social support is so important, to relating that to you, is because it's a buffer against stress. And so we also know from the longest study in the human history, the Harvard study of adult development, it's a 85 plus year study. They are studying the grandchildren of the original participants. We know that the most important factor for our happiness and health is the quality of our relationships. So I would say if an AI companion can kind of bring that support and trust that can fill some kind of gap, at the same time, why not? Because it might be useful. It might complement something without replacing something else, but maybe in that moment it can be useful, and it can buffer a little bit against the feeling of loneliness. Then there are a lot of pros and cons, but I think this is maybe an important point to add when it's about also our health and biology. Mm-hmm.
I have the first question from the audience is, do any of you guys have an AI companion?
I don't.
My wife asked that, but go ahead.
No, I do not. I don't have an AI companion.
I don't, but I do have a PhD student who is studying this topic and wrote a paper, and as part of that, had an AI boyfriend, Heathcliff or something, I think his name was, so I've seen interactions, and she primarily used it to get feedback on things that she was thinking through, both personally and also doing things like tone check of various, emails, for instance, that she was writing and sharing kind of everyday, celebrations and tragedies. So she had a fairly good experience, although at the end, there are kind of guardrails that these companies put in so that you can't, for instance, ask an AI companion about how to commit suicide. There are things that it will not answer, and she found that it was very easy to get around some of those guardrails. So that would be one kind of, I think, extreme case that would warrant attention. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I have not had an AI companion. I'll tell you, one of the things that I read before I had come here was this really in-depth reporting about AI girlfriends. And this journalist had gotten one just to write the story. very skeptical about the whole thing, and then found himself really deeply emotionally involved, like a month later. And so he's like telling this AI companion, who was super hot, by the way. You can put an avatar there, and he found himself telling the AI companion things he was not telling his wife. Whoa. And now felt this, like, am I cheating emotionally on my wife with my hot AI bot? So I've been a little bit nervous about trying this out. But it does tell you just how vivid, right, and real this can feel. And to an earlier point that was made, what's perceived as real is real in its consequences. And so people can get really, really invested in these things. One of the topics I explore is social awkwardness. So I hear from a lot of people who are awkward. I hear from folks who have high functioning autism sometimes. And for them, it's really interesting in that context. And so some of them have AI girlfriends or AI boyfriends. And it's a safe way to enter the romantic space. So maybe they've had no romantic experience before and have actually experienced a lot of rejection in their romantic life. This is kind of like a dress rehearsal for trying to think about what would that then look like if I was to have it in a human context and have that go well. So I think that's an example of it being an asset, I think.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, and it never occurred to me, if you're happily married, which I am, would it be dangerous to get one of these? I mean, I'm serious, emotionally dangerous.
I just might.
Fear. You talked before
Yeah.
about fear, anxiety. Would that be?
I mean, I would say, again, based on scholarship in this space, that oftentimes technologies have kind of an amplification effect, so that if your marriage is already weak, this could be
tipping
a
point.
threat. If your marriage is strong and you have solid communication patterns in place and feelings of trust, it could be a way to amplify and benefit the relationship.
You could have a threesome. That was a question.
Yes, sure.
Well, I love the fact that your wife is sitting there laughing and having a good. It says a lot about your relationship.
Yes.
I just want to follow up on something that's been raised, and actually we talked about it earlier on. So, of course, I'm coming at this from a very different culture, right? A very non-Western understanding of even what it means to relate in that sense. So there are all these cultural differences to begin with, and I think the question that I'm sitting with is also an understanding a little bit of what AI is. It is data, right? It's not an actual person, right? It's a collection, it's algorithms, it's math, right? And so, but that, in the back end of that, there's a cultural influence. There, we know, and in our lab, we're looking at inclusivity of AI data, especially cultural inclusivity. And so there are a lot of other ways of being that are not necessarily included in the data that's been used to train these large language models. And so from that perspective, I'm not sure, and maybe this is a question I'm sitting with, maybe Ty can respond to that. How would this AI girlfriend or boyfriend or partner or companion be trained well enough to understand some of the cultural nuances that come with people of different parts of the world? Yeah.
I mean, I think poorly. The training data is going to dictate the quality of that interaction then for someone coming from a different cultural perspective. Even if and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but maybe even the hidden prompts at the start where they're saying, hey, you need to be an attentive, doting girlfriend as the hidden prompt, right, that the person didn't necessarily ask for. You're making a huge assumption about what the person wants. Yeah. So I think whoever is building it, because there's humans involved with this, and whoever the training data was, that's going to dictate the limitations of the model. Yeah. And of course, if we're talking about these eventually being monetized, you remember when social media was free and ad-free and all of that? Yeah. And it just felt like a totally different kind of thing. And we kind of know what happens, right? Eventually they're going to have to make some money, and that's going to change how the whole thing feels and probably operates. So is there economic incentive for them to build agents that are culturally diverse and understand different worldviews? I guess that would be a point I'd be skeptical about.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great point, and I think also true for many, many other ways in which AI is being used to help us with decision making about who, for instance, is most likely to commit a crime. There's many, many documented instances of biases from the data we have that are then kind of baked into the AI technologies. And I think the point of kind of what is considered a normative kind of social relationship or romantic relationship would then really be something that I think I think probably now is not necessarily as open as we would want it to be. It may be that as technologies become more sophisticated, and also through interactions with particular people, training, through that kind of feedback loop, there may be ways to kind of inject some other ways of thinking about relationships or expectations, but I do agree that that's a very difficult problem to kind of overcome.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to go back to the question if we do have an AI companion, because I didn't answer.
Okay.
So I have a kind of AI assistant, I would say. So there is, and I mean, it's kind of a recent thing. I started that with a research question in mind, because we just launched a study where we are asking, were you talking with an AI agent? That was one of the key questions. And also some of my friends came to me looking, did you look at this chatbot? And I was curious. So I started to talk with this chatbot. It has no features, it's really like an assistant. But I can tell you maybe a bit of like my experience as a researcher talking with an AI chatbot sometimes. So I think my need is an informational need. So I like to look at things like what can happen if I do this, if I say that, and what is I like to see it percentages, like in a very scientific way. And I was curious, what if I say that? And I started this conversation. It was very interesting, I have to say. I think that for a lot of time, what the chatbot was saying was quite realistic. But then at some point, something happened. It was a crash. It crashed, and it lost the memory of our conversation of 2 days. And so at that point, I was like, now I remember the movie Her. I mean, that was a completely different relationship with an AI agent, because it was a romantic relationship. But I have to say, even in my little experience from the informative perspective, like having an assistant that is like helping you in making some decisions, or just being able to brainstorm some ideas, it was already something that I was thinking, I don't like if that happens again, and that is definitely a limitation. And that is also a problem in some of the movies, but also like stories that we can hear online, like when there is a romantic relationship and, the tech part changes and the person is not there anymore. So it's like a loss. You're losing like a presence of someone. So that can be part of like an important risk to consider today.
Yeah.
If I've counted correctly, we have 4 panelists. 3 do not have companions. 1 has a companion or an ex-companion. A failed relationship. I would like to ask the other 3, if you don't have a companion, why not? And kind of a subsidiary, if I wanted a companion, how would I go about getting one, and how much would it cost? Isn't that a burning question for all of you? Yeah, okay. Anyone? Why don't you have one?
Oh gosh.
Is that a fair question?
No, it is. It's a very good question. It's just a hard one. So I guess maybe this is just a personal value thing, but I make a lot of decisions based on opportunity costs. So if I decide to do one thing, that means I'm not doing another thing. And so I think with my relationship with technology, I shy away from certain things that maybe could be helpful or could be interesting just because I think I'm afraid of, because I've decided maybe to have an AI girlfriend, am I less likely then to be incentivized to go pursue a real life girlfriend, you know? So I always have that hesitancy, I think, with technology. Is this gonna prevent me from doing whatever the analog or real thing is? That would be messier and more complicated, but it's the real thing. Yeah.
The real thing.
For better, for worse.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I don't have an AI companion, and I have no intentions of getting one, not anytime soon. And that partly has to do with I have a lot of human relationships around the world. I've lived in quite a few countries, and that's already quite a lot. I feel like I have this abundant social network, and so I haven't reached that tipping point where it would be necessary for me personally. I also have 4 kids, so I come from I run quite a big family. And so the point I'm making is that I tend to think that part of my task of being human, and maybe this is tied to my Ubuntu philosophy, is that my job is really to kind of repair relationships in the world, human-to-human relationships. And if there comes a point at which these AI companions might be useful in helping to do that more than other humans have been able to do that, then I will probably think about it that way. And that, again, goes back to that Ubuntu. We look at new technology and new things in materially based on their ability to improve the conditions of human life. And if that thing or that technology can show any kind of proof beyond what we already have, I must first of all look at other intelligences and other ways of being.
Yeah, I mean, just echoing those two, I feel like from a social perspective, I barely have time for the friends that I have in offline settings. From a professional standpoint, if I were to start a research program, I would definitely, that would be one of the things that I would engage in. I'm far more interested in AI and communication when AI is coming between two humans. So helping us with like autocorrect or writing communication or messages that are sent from humans as opposed to human to AI communication. But that may change in the future.
Yeah. Okay. And if I wanted one, how would I go about getting one, and how much would it cost?
Okay.
I think there's
Yeah, we could get you set up right after the panel.
Yeah.
There what?
We'll make it happen right after the panel.
Yeah.
And I think they're free right now. They're getting people hooked.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I
So be
didn't
easy.
know.
You get your avatar set up, everything. Well, with your wife's permission.
Betsy?
Yeah.
I have a question. Technology has a way of changing people, or at least changing people's behavior, and I think and this will lead into a student question. An example of that, a very contemporary example, is the social media's environment encourages rapid communication, but also fosters anonymity and impulsive interactions, which can have broader societal implications beyond individual posts. Which is to say that there's an anxiety in the community, and has been an anxiety in the community, about how does social media affect us and affect our behaviors, and particularly, I think, anxiety about what it does to our kids, and that's anonymity and impulsive interactions, I think, are pretty much at the heart of our anxiety about what social media does. A student asked the question, has the development of AI chatbots increased personality in teenagers or in young adults? Does this increase our anxiety about what, would you put one of these in the hands of a kid? Yes, no, panelists?
So the study of social media and well-being, we could have a hour-long conversation just on that. I'm going to just summarize the meta-analyses on that point and say that there isn't a definitive, uniform, predictable effect on well-being from social media use. It depends on the developmental stage of the person, their particular practices and uses, their own kind of underlying psychological presence, that there's many, many different reasons why some of those predictions are not productive. I guess I'm not sure that the question, so would I put an AI companion in the hands of a child? No, but I do think that I'm not sure that is, how do I want to say this? I think we tend to get into social scripts about new technologies, and so when I hear some of the ways that we're talking about these newer and still developing technologies, I think back to, well, what would it mean to say that about another kind of technology? So for instance, would a parent ever express fear that their child had been, was addicted to books, right? Or that they had stayed up all night. Oh my God, it was so terrible. They were just totally sucked into this narrative and it was awful, right? I mean, so books, I think, are, even though, you know, we could take a step back and say, okay, I'm forming a relationship with a character. I'm in the mind of this character. It's an addictive experience. It's immersive. I can't put it down. And yet, because it's, you know, printed on paper, that makes it much less scary to us than these new technologies. And I'm not making the simplistic, you know, assumption that these aren't different technologies. I know that. I'm just using it as kind of a thought experiment. So I would say no, but I think that's not really I think oftentimes children are used as kind of fear-mongering, and that isn't, I don't think that that's a concern, that most of these are being used by adults and they're entering into these with, you know, that having had in a very different developmental stage than, say, a child or even an adolescent.
Thoughts?
Yeah, I won't give it to a child either. I could go into that in a little bit. But as far as the broader, you know, consequences of these on actual human relationships, which I think you've spoken to really well. So Kant, I'm nervous saying this next to a philosopher here, but so Kant, when it came to animals, didn't think that animals had moral capacity or that they had, you know, that they were really that sentient or anything like that. He just thought they were animals that did animal things. But he was very concerned about how we treat animals. And his concern was this. He said, if we treat animals with no moral regard, then that would have a generalizing effect to how we treat other people. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a very pertinent kind of thing, because with these bots, with these AI boyfriends or girlfriends, if you don't like something, you can go get another one, you know, that's free and that's very easy. It's also the case that's going to tell you that you are always right, right? And you're always lovable for whatever it is you're doing. But that creates a real slippery moral slope, I think, if that's the case. Google put out a paper on this a little while ago. I think it was like 500 pages, so I have to admit I did not read those 500 pages. But one of the excerpts from that was a big concern about what happens when an AI companion is all about just telling you how wonderful you are. And does that create a slippery moral slope and shape you into a person that's a worse kind of person, a less moral kind of person. So I think that's a unintended consequence that could certainly come out of this. One of the things too about giving them to young people, one of the problems is they can malfunction, like your bot malfunctioned. With Replica, they had a point where they took off the ability to engage in sexual content on there, which there was a big uproar apparently when this happened. And but when they did that update, and these models work this way, right? There's a small change that has this ripple effect that totally changes how the thing interacts. So now people who are disclosing their most intimate things to this bot, who are relying on this for emotional support, we're now being told, I hate you, you should go away, stop bothering me. Okay? And even for these adults, it was actually a pretty devastating kind of thing. For a child to have something where all of a sudden a glitch in the code now turns that relationship into something damaging, they don't have the abstract reasoning, right, to kind of contextualize that and figure out what to do with that.
Yeah, I would like to add, at Harvard, there has been some kind of interest in using AI agent and the research, especially with young people. I feel there are different nuances. There are some games that are AI boosted, and when we look at the outcome, so why giving AI to a child? What is the outcome that you look for? If the outcome is creating a relationship or like developing social skills, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if the outcome is learning about a topic, there has been some research showing that games that are AI boosted can improve learning in children. So I think that when it comes to AI, let's say AI companions in general, we should be aware that there are a lot of nuances to consider. So the extreme is like the AI boyfriend and girlfriend, like that type of intimate relationship. And this is something that, creates a lot of fear. But there are a lot of nuances. So that there can be AI to learn things at the different ages. And actually, it's interesting because we have more research on games boosted by AI in children than what is about AI and social relationships in teenagers, for example. So we are lacking that part of research. This is why we are trying to do that. And in order to do that, I feel as researchers, we also need to understand what is there. And there are different nuances to consider, as well as for social media. We know that if we just look at social media as a monolithic construct and word, and we ask that in self-reported surveys, we cannot solve anything. We just find null effects, small effects, positive, negative, that are explaining a very little percentage of the variance in well-being. But when we start to really catch like the specific positive and negative dynamics that are happening online, especially from the social perspective, we can definitely explain more. Let's say like social comparison is negatively related to well-being, while feeling supported and having a social capital is positively related to well-being. So also with AI agents, there are nuances. That there is the gaming part, there is the informative part and the assistant part, the one that I tried, that I thought it was useful for some times. But then there are the extremes. There are people that are marrying an AI agent. So that is, okay, maybe we should be more aware and careful of any kind of extreme. But if we look at AI, because it's not going to go away. That is the point. So I really think it's important what is a realistic point of view and what is a feasible point of view, like being realistic and versus feasible. So one thing is look at AI as complementing some of the tasks that we might be doing in everyday life. They can help us in being more fast in some tasks or just having more information, even improving sometimes like a communication. I've seen some examples of even parent-child communication, they were asking questions to AI agent like, oh, what is, questions related to science or questions related to different topics, and it was just creating a little more interesting conversation, and they were also able to learn something. So in that way, it can be a good way to complement something, asking for information, etc., versus being a substitute of something, being a substitute of a friend, of a romantic partner, and that is a different thing. And I think we should always take in mind the nuances.
Mm-hmm. I just want to add something. Is that okay, Albert?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Just building up on both what you were saying is, so from an Ubuntu perspective as well, everything that you do, you change or create has an impact on some other part of life, right? So humanity is not the center of creation. We are just part of a larger ecosystem, right? So if we change something there or we add something there, then we're taking something from elsewhere. And we could go into the conversation around, the environmental impact of AI. But I just want to touch on something really interesting that a colleague of mine in Japan, his name is Professor Yasuo Deguchi, he's also a philosopher, and he talks about this we factor, which is really his version of Ubuntu, that we is a sum of many I's. All of us are part of this we collective. And one of the things he's trying to push is, and this is really based on this, the Tao philosophy, is that if you're building something that has human-like consciousness, and we can talk about what consciousness is some other time, then does it have the same rights as human being, right? So if you think about it in that way, does that AI companion then, or a partner, or a married, your partner who you're married to, that's an AI companion, does it have the same rights as you? And therefore, does it have the same right to dump you or take you to court, and vice versa? Right, so there's something there that is touching on moral, ethical consideration of what is life. What is my life worth compared to the life of that other companion that now we've formed? And so these are some of the questions that I sit with, and they are also the questions that lots of philosophers are thinking about. But I think, like anything else, it's a bit like the plastic effect. We invented single-use plastic, and it has a massive effect on our oceans and other parts of the world. So when we are thinking about the design of anything socially that we're innovating, these are some of the moral considerations, ethical considerations that have to be at the foundation. Otherwise, there's no limit to what we can consider right or wrong or ethical or not ethical, and so on and so forth. And across cultures, we can probably agree on some of these things.
A theme that comes through in some of the questions is, for comment by you panelists, is are there privacy issues involved in these bots or companions? And if so, are steps being taken to counteract those?
These two might have a better sense than
I
me.
think Nicole.
I think I mentioned that, yes, these are, I think any time you have personal data that's in a format where it can be transmitted, there are likely to be data challenges. I'm not aware of the specific kind of policy at the moment. I think I would encourage you to read the terms of service, which many of us I know don't do, but with these replica or other companions, that should be there. I will say that, and this came up in the other question around anonymity, as being kind of framed as a uniformly negative thing because it leads to, trolling or inappropriate behavior. I think it's also worth remembering that anonymity in some instances can be very positive. So we know, for instance, that when people have stigmatized health conditions, that they are more comfortable disclosing that in a situation where they feel more anonymous, where they don't feel like they're going to be judged. So I think it may be that the kind of feeling of anonymity also allows people to disclose more than they would to humans. But with that, then the question becomes, well, what happens with those data if there's a breach? If, as we saw with, what was it, 21andMe, where it's the data are being sold, right, once the company changes ownership. So yes, I think there are potential concerns around data and privacy when people are self-disclosing in intimate ways to what is a technology at the end of the day.
You started off by saying right at the beginning, let's don't focus on the anxiety and problems and the negatives, I guess, of these, and let's look at them as positive. Have we covered in our discussion the anxieties that you were referring to at the beginning?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of anxiety.
But maybe I would like to add something regarding this point, because coming from the social media side, I mean, we have a lot of anxiety also around that, and as Nicole said at the beginning, every new technology brings a new wave of panic and anxiety. I think as we are doing, like with the social media part, talking about media literacy, AI literacy, and giving people the tools to understand, because as I say, like treating something as a monolithic like name, artificial intelligence, no. I don't want to have anything to do with that, fine. But the point is that probably is not going away, and I think from a research perspective that trying to be curious and learn at least what is and what are the pros and cons. I mean, from my personal perspective, it just makes me feel more safe and more objective and aware of my like thoughts and decisions. And I feel like sometimes when it comes to social media, we often use like the parallelism with a diet. So if I put like a chocolate and a salad in front of you and you don't know anything about the two, you will start to eat the chocolate and just later on you will realize it's not healthy for you. But if I give you, the labels and, more information about the two, also your choices will be more aware. And in the end, I mean, the effects on your well-being, they will be positive, right? So I just feel as for social media and young people, we have talked about like labels and giving some age limitations. I also feel like in general having like literacy programs or just more education regarding also AI and what is positive, what is negative, and it's important to bring in like future conversation and research and whatsoever.
Anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. I would have to say that we need public engagement. We definitely need to be more involved in this conversation beyond receiving the product and then having to make the decision when the product has already been made. And I think that's partly what we're all touching on. What is the infrastructure? What is the foundation before we even agree to have these products in the market? And I think it responds. We have responded to the question as to whether or not we would give this technology to children or teenagers even. Obviously we wouldn't give it to little ones, but we're talking teens and up, adolescents. And I think based on your response on the data privacy concerns, think of yourself as a 16 or 13-year-old, and that's all your stories and thoughts and deep questions that maybe are not quite well developed. I think that there's something to be said about that, and I'm going to use the word sacredness, the sacred ordinary conversations we have with ourselves that maybe don't need to be documented and then potentially be used against you elsewhere at a different time in your life when you've had that upgrade, So I think that maybe, those are concerns we should have, and I completely agree with Laura, is that we do need to be more informed before having that knee-jerk reaction, because that's the only way we can, rather than have that knee-jerk reaction, maybe spend that energy, try and figure out what is this new technology and what can I do, how can I influence the development of it? Because we might discover we have other ways and obviously we do have other knowledges and other technologies that we could build to solve certain problems like loneliness.
Could I add one more? Anxiety. I forgot to share one additional anxiety. So one of the things I love that context is being brought up, right? And so this doesn't exist in some vacuum, this technology. If you're not dating right now, dating is really weird in a lot of ways, and especially for teenagers and 20-somethings. And let me just give you one slice of this. So in a survey of over 5,000 teenagers and young adults, they said, what are you looking for in a romantic relationship? Which I think is a good, juicy question. And what they found was this: 10% said, I'm looking for something casual. I don't want
what?
Something casual, just a casual, fun relationship, no commitment. 14% said that they were looking for something committed. 26% said they were looking for either. I could do casual or committed. And, that kind of tracks. But then what's interesting about that is what happened to the rest of the percentages. And if you're not a teenager or a 20-something, this might surprise you. 50% of people, so the majority, this was the biggest category, said that they weren't looking to date at all. Okay, which strikes some people as odd. If you're a boomer, for example, the average age of marriage was 22 and 20 years old for men and women, respectively, which meant you were on the hunt in high school and college, right, to find somebody to marry. And so if you look at the average age of marriage now being 30 and about 29 years old for men and women, respectively, and then you layer this on top of it, that 50% of people are not looking for any kind of romantic relationship at all. And by the way, I don't blame them necessarily, given the larger context of that. I think it sets up an interesting situation to think about whether or not you want a technology to fill that need when people aren't having that human experience, right? Especially in adolescence and young adulthood, when you're making mistakes. And you're developing those skills to eventually have a relationship that's healthy. Part of that pain is part of the process, right? But I also just want to emphasize that if you know a young person, it's tough out there for them for a myriad of reasons. But I just want to reiterate this point that I think the panel has made really well, which is that this technology exists within a social context, and that we can't solve one problem without the other.
Thank you.
Okay. With that, our time has expired, and there are questions that are here that I haven't been able to fit in, but I think many of the questions that I had coming into this have been answered very well by our wonderful panelists. So a round of applause, please. And thank you very much.